Hey guys, tonight we step into something deeply familiar, yet surprisingly strange. The world of sleep in the Middle Ages. Not the sleep we know today, not the 8 uninterrupted hours of rest we expect, but medieval sleep, a practice that modern humans might find bizarre, fascinating, and even surprisingly logical. Before electricity, smartphones, TikTok, or carefully regulated sleep hygiene, people approached the night with a rhythm entirely their own, one that revolved around segmented sleep, spiritual practice, survival, and communal life. Before you get cozy, take a moment to like this video, subscribe if you enjoy this kind of journey into the past, and drop a comment sharing where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Because tonight, we travel across centuries into nights alive with ritual, responsibility, and human connection. Imagine the sun dipping below the horizon, casting warm, fading light across a village. Fires burn low, flickering against wooden beams. Chickens settle into the corner of the room. Dogs curl at the edges of straw pallets. Pigs snuffle near the hearth. And somewhere, an owl calls from the darkened fields. The air is cool, the scent of smoke lingers, and shadows stretch across every surface. But the 8-hour sleep you know today? That didn't exist. Medieval people followed a 2-part sleep cycle, now called segmented sleep. Modern science suggests this pattern may have been more natural to humans, aligned with circadian rhythms in the absence of artificial light. The night began with first sleep. Just after sundown, villagers would lay down on their beds, often straw pallets or simple mattresses. Families huddled together for warmth, children nestled between parents, cousins rolled side by side. Animals shared the space too: dogs, cats, chickens, sometimes even a pig or two, providing extra warmth and comfort. Privacy was non-existent. Comfort was secondary. Survival was essential. After roughly 4 hours, people naturally awoke. This period, known as the watch, was not insomnia. It was a time for productivity, reflection, and sometimes social interaction. People engaged in activities that seem odd to the modern eye. Prayer and devotion, from short personal prayers to reading religious texts, reciting psalms, or making spiritual preparations for the soul's safety overnight. Household and livestock care, tending fires, checking animals, preparing for morning chores, or ensuring nothing wandered off during the night. Intimacy. Medieval manuals suggest the watch period was ideal for couples, as the body was rested and the mind calm, a polite way of saying, too tired to argue, just ready for connection. This watch lasted 1 to 2 hours, after which villagers returned to second sleep, lasting until sunrise. Everyone followed this rhythm, from peasants and farmers to monks and nobility. Even literary figures like Chaucer referenced waking in the middle of the night. Waking wasn't failure. It was normal, practical, and socially accepted. Now, beds. Let's talk about beds, or rather, the medieval approximation of one. Peasant beds were often simple straw pallets, sometimes elevated on wooden frames if available. Straw was cheap, insulating, but also home to lice, fleas, and occasional rodents. Families slept fully clothed, pajamas weren't a concept. Comfort came second. Privacy was nearly impossible. A bed was a means of warmth and survival, not luxury. Wealthier households had feather mattresses, wooden frames, embroidered linens, and canopies to keep out drafts. Still, sleeping was rarely about comfort alone. Nightcaps, woolen or linen hats worn during sleep kept the head warm, and in the case of women, maintained modesty. Nightcaps could even indicate social status through embroidery or color. Hygiene was limited. Baths were infrequent. Laundry was expensive. Bedding harbored fleas, lice, and sometimes other pests. Nobles might employ servants to remove lice, while bedbugs hid in seams, cracks, and wooden frames, emerging at night to feed. Medieval people treated pests as inevitable companions of sleep. Herbs, ashes, garlic, and onion were sometimes used to repel them, often with mixed effectiveness. Knights on campaign occasionally slept partially armored. Chainmail and helmets restricted movement, but ensured survival. Shields could double as pillows, swords stayed close, and some nobles slept on angled frames to aid digestion or maintain readiness for surprise attacks. Comfort was optional. Safety and readiness were mandatory. As we step deeper into the night of medieval life, the world of the monks opens before us, a place where sleep was disciplined, communal, and spiritual. Imagine a monastery, a vast stone building echoing with the faint sound of dripping water and distant wind rattling through narrow windows. Rows of wooden planks serve as beds, some with thin straw mattresses, all aligned neatly like morally upright sardines. In these dormitories, sleep was not about comfort. It was about obedience, spiritual readiness, and discipline. Every monk followed the canonical hours, the structured rhythm of prayer, work, and study that dictated their lives. The night was punctuated by matins, the first service, often at the darkest hour, when even owls were still deciding whether to wake. Monks slept fully clothed in robes, belts, and sandals, not for modesty alone, but because getting dressed in the dark at 2 a.m. for prayer was more practical than removing layers only to put them back on moments later. Pillows were rare. Beds were hard. Silence was enforced, sometimes under penalty. If a monk groaned too loudly, he might face extra duties or admonishment. Yet snoring remained a gray area, unavoidable but tolerated. The night was a structured dance between wakefulness and rest. Monks rose for the watch, reciting prayers, chanting psalms, and reading scriptures by candlelight. They had to remain alert despite the chill, the lingering smell of smoke, and the physical exhaustion from the day. Falling asleep during matins was not just inconvenient, it could bring punishment. Some records note monks being assigned extra prayers or manual labor for dozing mid-service. Spiritual discipline required endurance. Children in medieval homes also had structured nighttime practices. They were encouraged to pray before sleep, both for spiritual well-being and as a means of distraction from nightly fears. Wandering spirits, mischievous fairies, and local legends that turned the darkness into a theater of cautionary tales. These weren't bedtime stories to soothe, but warnings to instill awareness, obedience, and preparation for the unseen. Dreams, in the medieval imagination, were more than random subconscious flickers. They were considered messages from God, angels, saints, demons, or occasionally the residual influence of relics or holy objects kissed during the day. Every dream had potential meaning, sometimes moral, sometimes prophetic. A fire in a dream might signal divine warning or hellfire. Water could signify purification or drowning. A bizarre vision of a man with a goat's head juggling fish demanded spiritual attention, often a priest's consultation. Monks and nuns meticulously recorded their dreams, sharing visions with superiors for interpretation. Holy dreams could elevate a monk's status. Less auspicious ones might result in fasting, prayer, or dietary adjustments, for example, fewer onions before bed. Dreams shaped actions, behavior, and sometimes social hierarchy, blending the spiritual, moral, and practical in a single nocturnal experience. Merchants, pilgrims, or local laborers all packed tightly. Privacy was not a consideration. Comfort was secondary. Safety and warmth were paramount. Theft was mitigated by sleeping atop bundles or tying purses to belts. Beds became arenas of negotiation, communal survival, and occasional social tension. Even the rich did not always enjoy solitude. Nobles traveling with entourages sometimes shared rooms with attendants or guards. For them, the bed was a strategic asset, a combination of security, warmth, and efficiency. Across social classes, sleep was an active negotiation with environment, society, and spiritual obligation. In the broader medieval context, waking up during the night was not a sign of failure or restlessness. It was expected. Between first and second sleep, people engaged in prayer, chores, and personal reflection. This period allowed for intimacy, quiet work, and contemplation. making night a time of both rest and activity, woven seamlessly into the rhythms of medieval life. Now, let's focus on the beds and sleeping gear that defined the medieval night. In today's world, beds are measured by thread count, foam density, and cooling technology. In medieval Europe, the concept of comfort was far simpler and far harsher. For peasants, beds were often straw pallets. Straw or hay, sometimes stuffed into a rough fabric sack, served as the mattress. Some families elevated these pallets on wooden frames, which offered minimal protection from the inevitable pests. Fleas, lice, and the occasional mouse were constant companions. Comfort was secondary. Survival and warmth came first. Families often shared these beds. Parents, children, sometimes even extended relatives. Privacy was a luxury almost entirely absent from daily life. Wealthier families enjoyed better accommodations. Feather mattresses, wooden frames, embroidered linens, and canopies provided physical comfort and social distinction. But even then, beds were not merely for rest. They were a defense against the cold, pests, and spiritual vulnerability. Many wore nightcaps, long wool or linen hats designed to protect the head from chill. For women, nightcaps also covered hair, maintaining modesty and sometimes signaling family wealth through embroidery or color. These hats could communicate status and even social readiness. Opening a door with the nightcap on subtly said, "I am off duty and conversation is unwelcome." Hygiene remained a challenge. Baths were rare, laundry costly, and soap often made from harsh, abrasive substances. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs thrived in straw mattresses and shared bedding. Nobles might employ servants dedicated to removing lice, but for most, these pests were unavoidable nightly companions. Herbs like wormwood, ashes, garlic, and onion were deployed in the bed or room to repel bugs, though effectiveness varied. Fleas were even given moral symbolism, seen as reminders of sin or moral impurity. Medieval literature sometimes romanticized these tiny tormentors, a testament to their omnipresence in daily life. Sleeping arrangements became more complex for knights and soldiers. Armor and weapons could accompany the knight. Partial armor, chainmail, or gambesons, quilted jackets, allowed readiness and protection in case of attack or siege. Shields sometimes doubled as pillows, swords stayed close. Comfort was sacrificed for survival, and the heavy, restrictive garments made sleep arduous. Knights often removed helmets and gauntlets, but left other layers on, navigating the night with both vigilance and fatigue. Travelers faced similar challenges. Inns rarely offered private rooms. Beds could host multiple strangers, sometimes segregated by gender or profession, but often first come, first served ruled. Sharing a bed meant negotiating space, warmth, and sometimes social propriety. Despite these challenges, this communal system was safer than sleeping outdoors with wolves, rain, or wandering thieves. Travelers kept purses under blankets, on bundles, or tied to belts as improvised security systems. Animals played a crucial role in medieval warmth. In peasant homes, livestock often shared the same room or even the bed. Dogs curled at feet, pigs snuffled near the fire, and chickens wandered freely. This wasn't about companionship, it was survival and thermal efficiency. Animals generated heat, warded off cold, and sometimes provided a form of moral or spiritual presence, a buffer against the perceived dangers of the night. Sleeping upright was sometimes a deliberate practice, influenced by medicine and superstition. Lying flat was considered unhealthy or too close to the posture of the dead, potentially attracting spiritual attention or illness. Nobles and devout monks might sleep semi-reclined on angled beds, benches, or against walls. Comfort was not the goal. Discipline, spiritual vigilance, and bodily theory dictated posture. Sleepwalking, noctambulation, and other unusual behaviors were interpreted spiritually. Wandering the home at night could be seen as possession or demonic influence. Remedies included tying the sleeper's leg to a chair, prayers, iron charms, or a simply heightened vigilance. Medieval society integrated sleep into moral, spiritual, and social frameworks, making every aspect of rest a matter of survival, virtue, and preparation for the unknown. In medieval monasteries, the night was highly structured, blending sleep with devotion, discipline, and preparation for spiritual duties. Monks and nuns followed canonical hours, a series of prayer services spread across the day and night. Among these, matins, the first night service, could occur in the darkest hours, sometimes around 2 or 3 a.m., before the world stirred and even owls had decided to wake. Imagine a long, silent dormitory filled with robed monks, all lying fully clothed on wooden planks or thin straw mattresses. Pillows were minimal, blankets thin, and comfort secondary to spiritual readiness. When the bell tolled, signaling matins, the monks shuffled to the chapel in absolute silence, every step careful, measured, and disciplined. Dressing in layers was essential, for the cold stone of the monastery and the chill of pre-dawn hours made even minor exposure painful. Once in the chapel, candlelight flickered across stone walls as monks chanted psalms, recited scripture, or meditated. Sleepiness was a constant challenge, yet dozing during matins could bring punishment, extra prayers, manual labor, or moral reprimand. The practice instilled endurance and spiritual vigilance. Every sleepless night was training for eternal life. Children were not exempt from ritualized nighttime practices, though for them, prayers before sleep served multiple purposes. They soothed anxiety about dark spirits and mischievous fairies while instilling early spiritual discipline. Angels, moral consequences, and protective prayers functioned as a medieval form of bedtime guidance. Far less about comfort, more about preparing the soul for the uncertainty of night. Dreams were taken seriously. They were windows into spiritual truth or danger, reflecting divine messages, demonic temptation, or moral lapses. Medieval dream interpretation was a careful study. Fire, water, animals, or strange figures all carried symbolic weight. A vision of a goat-headed man juggling fish might prompt fasting, prayer, or consultation with a cleric. Monks recorded dreams meticulously, sometimes gaining reputations for holy visions, while others were advised to adjust diet or habits to prevent nocturnal disturbances. For travelers and peasants, the night presented its own rituals. Inns were communal spaces where strangers slept in close quarters. Sharing beds was necessary for warmth, safety, and efficient use of resources. Theft prevention included sleeping atop bundles, tying purses to belts, or keeping valuables hidden beneath clothing. Even in the wealthier inns, attendants or guards might share space with travelers, ensuring safety while sleep remained fragile and intermittent. Animals in peasant homes were integral to warmth. Dogs, pigs, and chickens shared rooms and beds with humans, providing body heat and a rudimentary form of night surveillance. This was practical, not affectionate. Livestock generated warmth and comfort, ensuring survival during bitter winters. Humans and animals coexisted closely, sometimes even sharing straw piles, creating a sleeping environment that blended life, warmth, and communal safety. Medieval sleep also accounted for potential dangers. Night was perceived as a time of vulnerability. Demons, spirits, and ill fortune were believed to roam in darkness. Group sleeping, especially for children, was protective. Solitary sleep could invite mischief, danger, or a spiritual attack. Married couples often shared beds with children, servants, or even temporary guests. Privacy was rare. Survival and spiritual security dictated communal arrangements. Even the act of waking was deliberate. Between the first and second sleep, people engaged in personal reflection, prayer, tending fires, or quiet chores. This segmented sleep, a natural two-part rhythm, aligned with human circadian cycles. Unlike modern ideas of uninterrupted sleep, medieval society embraced waking periods as useful and necessary, blending spiritual, practical, and social activity. Medieval nights were not simply about rest, they were also about preparation, protection, and devotion. The concept of a nightcap didn't mean whiskey or wine. Instead, it referred to a practical hat, often wool or linen, worn to keep the head warm during bitter nights. Stone walls, drafty roofs, and thin animal horn windows made insulation a challenge, so the humble nightcap was essential. For women, it doubled as a modesty garment, covering hair while signaling family status through embroidery or dye. Wearing one could communicate subtle social cues, a silent declaration that conversation or intrusion was unwelcome. Nightshirts accompanied these caps, long, loose tunics designed for practicality rather than comfort. Scratchy and simple, they covered the body while accommodating shared sleeping arrangements. Even in more urban settings, a nightcap and nightshirt were a signal of being off-duty, a medieval etiquette that blended practicality with social signaling. The canonical hours demanded prayers at specific times, often in complete darkness, requiring silent movement through stone corridors and careful dressing in layered robes. Some monks slept upright, partially reclined or on wooden benches to avoid excessive comfort and ensure readiness for nocturnal prayers. Falling asleep during services like matins could incur punishment, reinforcing discipline and spiritual vigilance. In peasant homes, survival dictated both warmth and strategy. Sleeping with livestock, dogs, pigs, chickens, was practical thermal strategy, ensuring that both humans and animals survived freezing nights. Beds, often straw pallets, were rarely comfortable. Families shared spaces not out of intimacy but necessity, conserving heat and maintaining moral and social oversight. Privacy was a luxury rarely afforded, as sleeping alone could be viewed as impractical or even spiritually dangerous. Sleepwalking, noctambulation, and other nighttime behaviors were taken seriously. Wandering in the night could indicate possession, spiritual disturbance, or imbalance of bodily humors. Remedies ranged from tying the sleeper to a chair to reciting protective prayers over the bed. Barred windows, iron charms, and close communal sleeping acted as preventative measures. Night was both practical and supernatural, blending human vulnerability with spiritual vigilance. Armor and weapons were sometimes part of the sleep routine, particularly for knights, soldiers, or travelers in hostile areas. Sleeping in partial armor, chainmail, breastplates, gambesons, ensured readiness while sacrificing comfort. Shields might serve as pillows, swords lay close at hand, and sleeping upright or semi-reclined minimized vulnerability. Comfort was secondary, survival and protection were the priorities. Pests, hygiene, and practical concerns were never far away. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs thrived in shared, straw-filled sleeping arrangements. Nobles might employ dedicated servants to remove lice, but for most, coexisting with pests was a nightly reality. Herbs, ashes, or strong-smelling plants were used in an attempt to repel them. Nightcaps, full clothing, and careful positioning offered both warmth and rudimentary protection against these nocturnal invaders. Nighttime was also a time of reflection and spiritual maintenance. People prayed to protect themselves from demons, illness, and misfortune. Children were guided to pray, both for spiritual protection and to maintain order in the household. Dreams were interpreted for guidance, caution, or divine warning. Even during wakeful periods between first and second sleep, these spiritual and practical activities filled the night, transforming what we consider sleep into a complex rhythm of rest, devotion, and survival. The medieval night, then, was far removed from modern ideas of sleep as comfort, entertainment, or health maintenance. It was a period of layered purpose, survival, warmth, spiritual preparation, communal oversight, pest management, and moral vigilance. Each element of nightlife, from nightcaps to straw beds, from sleepwalking precautions to segmented sleep, reflected a world where rest was inseparable from the realities of living in an uncertain, often dangerous time. This wakeful interlude was normal and functional, not considered insomnia or a disruption. People used it for prayer, reflection, household chores, tending fires, or caring for livestock. Farmers checked that goats, sheep, and cows were secure, while the devout prayed or read religious texts. It was a time of calm activity, quiet introspection, and practical vigilance. Some couples embraced this period for intimacy, guided by contemporary medical advice that suggested the body was most receptive and relaxed during this middle-of-the-night window. Even literature and historical records reflect this rhythm. Geoffrey Chaucer and other writers casually noted first and second sleep, demonstrating that waking at night was culturally accepted and widely practiced. Modern science suggests this two-phase sleep aligns naturally with human circadian rhythms, especially in the absence of artificial light. Waking at 2 or 3 a.m. was not a failure, but an inherent part of human biology. After the interlude, the second sleep followed, lasting until sunrise. This was often accompanied by early morning prayers, chores, or preparation for the day ahead. Monks might move directly from the second sleep into study or manual labor, while peasants rose to tend fields, prepare breakfast, or care for livestock. The night was thus both productive and restorative, blending spiritual, domestic, and practical activities seamlessly. In households, the first and second sleep allowed families to manage limited resources efficiently. Shared warmth, vigilance over children, and security measures were enhanced by these wakeful periods. Even small tasks, feeding animals, stoking fires, or maintaining protective barriers were easier to accomplish during these hours. Segmentation also influenced social behavior. During the watch period, some might visit neighbors, converse quietly, or handle correspondence in the rare literate households. Religious individuals used the time for private devotion or confession, while others took advantage of the stillness for reflection or creative activity. The middle-of-the-night pause was both a buffer and a bridge between two cycles of rest. Beds, bedding, and physical comfort remained secondary to this rhythm. Straw pallets, nightcaps, layered clothing, and shared sleeping spaces were designed to support temperature regulation, pest protection, and communal oversight, not luxury. Even nobles adhered to the rhythm, though with enhanced comfort, feather mattresses, and canopied beds. In all cases, the segmented sleep pattern structured nighttime behavior, aligning human activity with natural cycles and the realities of medieval life. For travelers, inns, and temporary lodgings, the segmented sleep system offered predictability. Shared beds, minimal privacy, and vigilance over possessions were balanced by periods of wakefulness when individuals could perform tasks or socialize without disturbing the household. Survival, spiritual obligations, and practical efficiency were intertwined, reflecting a world where night was both sacred and strategic. Medieval beds were far removed from modern notions of comfort. The typical peasant bed was a straw mattress, often referred to as a pallet, laid on the floor or elevated on a simple wooden frame. This bed provided basic insulation against cold stone floors, but was scratchy, uneven, and infested with insects such as fleas, lice, and bedbugs. Families slept fully clothed in layers to retain warmth and as a form of protection from pests. Nightcaps, long tunics, and shared blankets offered practical solutions, while sleep remained a communal affair. Children, parents, and sometimes extended family slept in the same space, minimizing heat loss and ensuring mutual surveillance. Nobles, in contrast, had more luxurious accommodations. Their beds featured wooden frames, feathered mattresses, canopies, and embroidered sheets. These beds were so valuable that they were passed down in wills. Inheritance often meant receiving a prized feather bed rather than land. Despite this luxury, sleep was still highly structured, shaped by religious and social norms. Hygiene was limited across all social classes. Baths were infrequent, laundry was costly, and personal cleanliness was often rudimentary. Sharing bedding with family, servants, or travelers amplified exposure to pests. Nobles sometimes employed dedicated servants to remove lice, but even this was insufficient to eliminate fleas and bedbugs. Remedies included burning herbs, sprinkling ashes, or sleeping fully clothed to mitigate the effects of infestations. The discomfort of physical irritants was normalized and rarely questioned. It was simply part of medieval life. Nighttime rituals extended beyond sleep and hygiene. Prayer was central. People recited bedtime prayers, psalms, and protective incantations to guard against disease, demonic influence, or spiritual misfortune. Children were encouraged to pray, partly to instill discipline and partly to shield them from supernatural threats. Dreams were meticulously interpreted. Fire might indicate hell, water, purification or drowning, and fantastical visions required consultation with clergy or fasting to avert harm. Nighttime was a blend of practical vigilance and spiritual mindfulness. In communal or monastic settings, sleeping arrangements were even more austere. Monks in dormitories lay on wooden planks with straw padding, fully clothed, often sleeping upright or semi-reclined to maintain discipline. Silence was enforced under Saint Benedict's rules, and snoring or excessive movement could lead to censure. The purpose of sleep was not pleasure, but preparation for spiritual readiness, for survival, and for facing the unpredictable dangers of life in a world without modern comfort or protection. Even in inns, beds were shared with strangers, a practical necessity rather than choice. Travelers slept closely to maintain warmth and protect possessions. Theft was deterred by sleeping atop valuables, tying purses to belts, or keeping luggage as a pillow. Noise, snoring, and discomfort were expected. Inns, peasant homes, and monasteries alike reflected a night shaped by survival, structure, and social expectation. Medieval sleep was therefore multifaceted, a combination of physical rest, pest management, spiritual observance, communal strategy, and practical action. From straw pallets to feather beds, from nightcaps to layered tunics, every element of the sleeping environment served a purpose. The night was not a passive time of rest, but an active, structured, and deeply meaningful part of daily life, reflecting the broader realities of survival, faith, and community in medieval Europe. While sleep was structured and purposeful, the night was not without danger. Medieval people faced threats that modern sleepers rarely consider: fire, theft, illness, wandering livestock, wild animals, and, in some regions, raiders or hostile neighbors. Beds, though functional, offered limited protection, and shared sleeping spaces made vigilance essential. This constant awareness shaped the medieval sleep experience as both practical and survival-oriented. One particular concern was sleepwalking, a phenomenon poorly understood at the time. Rising from a straw pallet in the middle of the night, a person might wander, mutter prayers, or attempt impossible tasks, causing alarm among household members. Sleepwalkers were sometimes believed to be possessed, bewitched, or spiritually troubled. Remedies included tying the individual to a chair, placing iron charms in the room, or invoking prayers to saints. Accounts suggest some sleepwalkers climbed rooftops, opened doors, or moved through dangerous terrain while still unconscious, a terrifying possibility in a world of open hearths, knives, and livestock. Storms and weather hazards were another ever-present concern. Without modern insulation or weatherproofing, stone walls, thatched roofs, and thin animal horn windows offered little protection. Thunderclaps shook homes, wind whistled through open eaves, and rain or snow frequently leaked indoors. People adapted by sleeping near the hearth or huddling together with family and animals for warmth and reassurance. The ambient noise of storms became part of the medieval white noise, blending with church bells, livestock, and household activity to create a constant soundtrack of vigilance. Even invasions, sieges, or epidemics did not halt this nightly rhythm. Farmers, merchants, and townsfolk slept through famine warnings, death cards, or the distant sound of warfare, adjusting to the harsh realities of their environment. Sleep was fragmented, yes, but adapted to a world where survival demanded alertness, flexibility, and resilience. Some people even used sleep as an escape from grief, illness, or the constant stress of medieval life. A simple nap under a cloak or beside the hearth could provide temporary refuge from the unrelenting pressures of the outside world. Monastic and religious sleepers exhibited remarkable endurance. Monks and nuns adhered to rigorous schedules, awakening for canonical hours, prayers, or nocturnal labor. Matins, compline, and other services required rising in complete darkness, often in freezing temperatures, wearing full robes and belts. Falling asleep mid-service could result in reprimand or additional work. This discipline exemplified the medieval understanding of sleep not as leisure, but as part of a broader spiritual, social, and physical routine. Travelers, pilgrims, and those seeking shelter in inns faced similar endurance tests. Beds were shared, privacy was non-existent, and conditions were often unsanitary. Security concerns required sleeping atop possessions or tying belongings to the body. Noise, crowding, and the unpredictability of fellow sleepers created a constant need for vigilance. Yet these practices were normalized, forming part of the collective adaptation to a world without modern comforts. Finally, the medieval night was intertwined with faith and superstition. Darkness was believed to be a time when the soul was vulnerable to evil, and communal sleeping offered protection against spiritual dangers as much as physical ones. Dreams were interpreted, prayers were recited, and holy objects were kept nearby to guard against demons or misfortune. Sleep was both a practical necessity and a deeply symbolic activity, linking the mundane and the divine in every household. In conclusion, the medieval approach to sleep was a complex tapestry of structure, survival, spirituality, and social interaction. Segmented sleep, shared beds, nightcaps, pest control, and wakeful periods formed a coherent system adapted to the limitations and dangers of the time. Storms, invasions, illnesses, and sleepwalking were not anomalies, but integral parts of nightly life. People slept not just to rest, but to prepare, protect, and endure. In this world, sleep was a careful negotiation between comfort, danger, faith, and necessity. A rhythm of life far removed from the luxury and isolation of modern bedrooms.